Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out tonight with Gloria Vanderbilt, who died recently at the age of 95. She was the great-great-granddaughter of the Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was one of the richest men in the world based on his shipping and railroad ownership. The Vanderbilt fortune and fortunes have gone up and down throughout the decades, and when Gloria was 10, she was involved in a bitter custody fight between her mother and her aunt.
I was born into a sense of loss, and I've spent the rest of my life trying to find that which I lost. I went to live in Europe until I was 9. I never even sort of knew about the Vanderbilt family or the Whitney family until I came to live with my aunt when I was 9. So I never sort of felt connected with, and actually still don't. I mean, I'm kind of the orphan that kind of got taken in somehow.
This was in the early 30s. It was in all the newspapers. Her aunt eventually won custody of her, and she was known as the poor little rich girl, and Noel Coward even wrote a song about her.
Poor little rich girl, you're a bewitched girl, better take care.
As she got older, she became an artist and a bon vivant. She married 4 times, including to one of Lucky Luciano's henchmen, to the famous conductor Leopold Stokowski, and to the film director Sidney Lumet, although her happiest marriage was to the actor and writer Wyatt Cooper. They had 2 sons, one of whom committed suicide tragically, and the other one is Anderson Cooper, the big noise on CNN. However, in the 1970s, Gloria Vanderbilt became most famous for her very successful line of fashion jeans for women.
The first thing in fashion I did was I designed scarves for Glentex painting, for my paintings. And from that, I got into designing for a blouse company, and there was a merchandising genius called Warren Hirsch who said, well, look, we've got all this jean fabric. Why don't we do jeans? That's how Gloria Vanderbilt jeans started.
Miss Vanderbilt, you're a terrific designer. But why are you doing jeans now?
I wanted to make classic jeans that really fit the American woman. Look.
Gloria Vanderbilt jeans go up to size 40 because so do so many foxy-looking ladies. Gloria Vanderbilt by Marjani.
Here's ABC News on Gloria Vanderbilt.
Funny tonight here, she was born into a famous family, but she was determined to define every chapter of her life herself. And she did. Celebrating Gloria Vanderbilt. Gloria Vanderbilt was born into the famous Vanderbilt family, the great-great-granddaughter of railroad and shipping tycoon Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt. She lost her father when she was just a baby, and at the tender age of 10, she was the subject of a bitter child custody battle between her mother and her aunt. The newspapers covered every step of the battle. She was married 4 times. She had 4 children. She would act as a young woman, and over the course of her life, she would write and paint, too. ABC News at the opening of her art show in 1969 in New York City.
Well, how do you feel personally, having your work here?
Oh, I'm delighted. I love to work, and I work hard and long, and this is going to keep me going, and I like that, so I'm delighted with it.
Gloria, you're terrific.
But many will remember when she turned the family name into a fortune. Her eye, her jeans.
This is Gloria Vanderbilt, the woman who invented designer jeans and almost overnight changed the way America dresses.
They were everywhere.
Introducing canvas jeans that were built for your figure. Vanderbilt for your figure.
But Gloria Vanderbilt would navigate her share of loss, too. In 1988, she lost a son, Carter, to suicide, and she wrote about it. He was just 23. But she would remain an optimist, once saying, "Be kind to everyone you meet, for everyone is fighting a great battle. We all are. Everyone." And it was her devoted son, Anderson Cooper, who announced her passing today. You could hear it in his voice.
The last few weeks, every time I kissed her goodbye, I'd say, "I love you, Mom." She would look at me and say, "I love you too." And in the end, what greater gift can a mother give to her son?
Gloria Vanderbilt was 95.
What an extraordinary life. What an extraordinary mom. And what an incredible woman.
If you ever get a chance, you should check out the story of the Vanderbilt fortune from the Commodore on down. It's really a fascinating story. And Gloria Vanderbilt gets her own chapter, if not 2.
I never had any support as far as anybody encouraging me to create. I just had the drive. I just wanted so much to make something of my life.
We're going to move on now to Charles Reich, who died recently at the age of 91. He was a Yale Law professor who dropped out in the 60s. He tuned in and turned on, went to San Francisco in the summer of love, and really there are a whole bunch of stories like his. What makes his remarkable is that in 1970 he wrote a book called The Greening of America, which became a bestseller, sold over 2 million copies. And it was sort of weird hippie stuff. I remember reading it in high school. Based on the hippie lifestyle, he made a whole bunch of predictions about how society would be. He got almost all of them wrong, although ironically he got the general tenor of what would happen in the next 50 years right. Even in high school when I was reading it, I thought it was really schlock, but like I say, it sold several million copies and made a big name for him, although essentially he's been forgotten today. Here's the Seattle Times on Charles Reich. Charles Reich, author and Ivy League academic whose The Greening of America blessed the counterculture of the 1960s and became a million-selling manifesto for a new and euphoric way of life, has died. Reich was a popular Yale University professor whose students included both Bill and Hillary Clinton, and a respected legal scholar when a 39,000-word excerpt from The Greening of America ran in the New Yorker in September 1970, generating a massive volume of letters. The book was published a few weeks later and sold more than 2 million copies, making Reich a middle-aged hero for a rebellious generation, despite scorn from both conservatives and liberals. The Greening of America expanded upon such critiques of conformity and consumerism as David Reisman's The Lonely Crowd and Vance Packard's The Status Seekers, and presented American history as an evolution of consciousness, a three-part story with a surprise ending. Consciousness 1, dating back to the country's beginnings, reflected a Jeffersonian society of individualism, virtue, and suspicion of government. Consciousness 2, which matured in the 20th century, believed in the organization, in technology and government and big business. Insanity, artificiality, and untruth are the commonplace stuff of the corporate state. Reich wrote, the uprisings of the 1960s marked the dawn of Consciousness 3, the triumph of compassion and imagination, an awakening enabled by sex, drugs, and rock music. Best of all, Reich concluded that violence and mass protests were unnecessary. Consciousness, too, was so stagnant, so helpless, once it loses the ability to create false consciousness, that acts as simple as refusing a promotion at work would hasten its collapse. This is the revolution of the new generation, he wrote. It is both necessary and inevitable, and in time it will include not only youth, but all people in America. Reich's 20s and 30s were a giant step from Consciousness 2 to Consciousness 3. A gifted legal thinker, he became editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, clerked for Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, and was hired by a top Washington firm, Arnold, Fortas and Power. In Washington in the 1950s, he was part of a world which all of us believed to be at the center and yet typical of American life, he wrote. But he remembered himself as a spy inside a city with almost no authenticity, a restless spirit bound up in a Brooks Brothers suit. His liberation began in 1960 when he returned to Yale. He felt more relaxed and loved the classroom. His legal article, The New Property, helped influence the landmark 1970 Supreme Court decision in Goldberg v. Kelly that gave welfare recipients the right to a hearing before the government could cut off their benefits. In 1967, anxious for new experience, Reich acted upon a friend's suggestion and spent the summer of love in Berkeley, California. The shy college professor at first resisted, but gave in to a feeling of enchantment with the humor, happiness, high spirits, and freedom of the long-haired kids. Back in Yale, he began teaching in a more informal style, smoked pot with the students, and let them call him by his first name. He had been thinking of writing a book about the country's decline, but instead prophesied a golden age. The Greening of America became a highlight of the era and eventually an artifact. For years the book was out of print until an abridged e-edition came out in 2012. Reich acknowledged the tenacity of Consciousness 2, but never gave up on reaching the next stage. It could still be reality, but at the moment it's viewed as something like a fantasy or a dream that people woke up from with a headache, he said in 2010, noting that young people in the 21st century were more likely to worry about having a job. Like I say, the book was essentially hippie schlock, but if you wanted to understand how American society changed in the late 60s and early 70s, The Greening of America is an essential tome. Well, we're going to move on now to Alan Brinkley, who died recently at the age of 70. Alan Brinkley was one of the country's top historians. He specialized in 20th century American political history. Alan Brinkley has quite a family pedigree. He was a nice Jewish boy born in Washington, D.C., lived in Chevy Chase, and his father was David Brinkley of the Huntley-Brinkley Report. By the way, he was born the same day and in the same hospital room as the New York Times writer Frank Rich. Alan Brinkley was a liberal, but he was much more kind to the conservative mindset than his hospital mate. Alan Brinkley went to Princeton. He got some of his first experience learning about politics when his father brought him to the 1968 Democratic National Convention. The Huntley-Brinkley Report did some stellar reporting during that chaos here in Chicago back in '68. He got his doctorate from Harvard, moved on to teach history at MIT for a while, and then went back to Harvard, and he was up for tenure at Harvard and didn't get it, and that was sort of a big deal back in the day because he was a pretty accomplished historian. I think there was some professional jealousy going on. Might have been a good move in the long run. He ultimately moved to Columbia, where he became head of the department for a while. He became a pretty prolific writer, combined his historical writing with some journalistic writing. He often contributed to the newspapers, and he was reasonably honest about the conservative-liberal schism that's been going on in the United States since the end of World War II. This is from NPR. Alan Brinkley, an influential historian and academic who traced the evolution of liberalism from the New Deal to the 21st century and was a popular commentator on culture and politics, has died at age 70. One of 4 children of network anchorman David Brinkley, Alan Brinkley grew up in a home where guests included John F. Kennedy and Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., and politics, history, and culture were all-day conversations. He became a National Book Award winner, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and prominent author of 2 widely used American history textbooks. He also taught at Harvard University and Columbia University, which he joined in 1991. At Columbia University, he served as university provost from 2003 to 2009. Liberalism and the forces opposed to it were the themes of much of Brinkley's work. He came of age in the 1950s and 60s when conservatism seemed so far outside the mainstream that critic Lionel Trilling declared liberalism not only the dominant, but even the sole intellectual tradition. But by the end of the 1960s, with the rise of the so-called New Right and divisions among liberals brought on by the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, critics and scholars were reconsidering their consensus that only liberal thought mattered. Nothing has become clear over the past 30 years, both in historical scholarship and in our experience as a society, than that the consensus agreement, on that point at least, was wrong, Brinkley wrote in 1998. 4 years earlier, Brinkley had set off a prolonged debate with the essay The Problems with Conservatism, in which he called American conservatism something of an orphan in historical scholarship. He praised some conservative works and found that while historians have displayed impressive powers of imagination in creating empathetic accounts of many once obscure areas of the past, they have seldom done so in considering the character of conservative lives and ideas. From his first book, Voices of Protest, Brinkley was pointing out the importance of views challenging mainstream liberalism. Winner of the National Book Award, then called the American Book Award, in 1983, Voices of Protest focused on the 1930s populist leaders Huey Long and Father Coughlin, and how President Franklin Roosevelt responded to their attacks on the New Deal. Long and Coughlin were not the leaders of irrational anti-democratic uprisings, Brinkley wrote. They were manifestations of one of the most powerful impulses of the Great Depression and of many decades of American life before it, the urge to defend the autonomy of the individual and the independence of the community against encroachments from the modern industrial state. Brinkley's other books included short works on Roosevelt and Kennedy and a biography of Time magazine publisher Henry Luce that was a Pulitzer finalist in 2011. Brinkley also contributed substantially to his father's best-selling memoir, Washington Goes to War. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and as a final tribute to Alan Brinkley, we're going to play the music that's most closely identified with his father. This is the theme that introduced the Huntley-Brinkley Report on NBC every night. We might have played it before. It's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Second Movement. When you heard this on NBC, you knew you were about to hear Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.